Hello, my dear students. Welcome to our classroom. So, how do scientists acquire knowledge? First, let's go to bookwidgets.com/play and enter the code below. Alright, so are you done? So it's all about the jigsaw puzzle. Okay, so the jigsaw puzzle answers our question a while ago. Alright, so the jigsaw puzzle is all about the steps of the scientific method. So today our lesson is all about scientific investigation. So in this module, you will learn to describe the components of a scientific investigation. The objectives are: define scientific method, list the steps of a scientific method, and show example problems solved using the steps of the scientific method. So what is a scientific method? So scientific method is a process for experimentation that is used to explore observations and answer questions. So in the definition, it says it's a process, so it involves steps then. So what are the steps of the scientific method? So we have usually 6 steps. Other books mention 7 steps. Alright, so we have the first step, asking a question. Second step, doing background research. Third step, constructing a hypothesis. Fourth step, testing your hypothesis by doing an experiment. Fifth step, analyzing your data and drawing a conclusion. And sixth step, communicating results. Let's go to the first step, asking a question. So in asking a question, it involves the 6 WH questions and the 1H. So we have the what, the when, the who, which, why, when, and how. So example of asking question is, how do maggots come into being? So in this first step, you should have a good question. When I say a good question, it should be answerable and it should be hats. So can you see the picture here? Upon seeing the maggots, this person asked himself, how do maggots come into being? Second step, doing background research. So this describes why you are doing the experiment. So how can we do this? You can go to the library, scan the books. That is a way of doing background research. Example, so since the person I have mentioned a while ago asked himself, how do maggots come into being? He then did his research. So people believe long time ago that organisms suddenly appeared from non-living matter. So example, maggots from meat, mice from grain. So this idea was called spontaneous generation. That means life could arise from non-living matter. So this is the illustration. Maggots come from meat. So that is the result of the background research did by the person who asked, how do maggots come into being? Then the third step, constructing a hypothesis. So a hypothesis, it is a testable statement. So it is an attempt to answer a question with an explanation that can be tested. So a good hypothesis allows you to then make a prediction. Alright, let's proceed to the example. Can you please read it for me? Alright, so this is the hypothesis of Francesco Redi. So he proposed, or his hypothesis is flies laid eggs on the meat, then the eggs then developed into maggots. So basically, if you are going to convert that into an if-then statement, if the flies laid eggs on the meat, then the eggs then develop into maggots. So this is the illustration of the flies, or the fly laying eggs on the meat. Later on, the eggs will become a maggot. So this is the hypothesis proposed by Francesco Redi. Let's have the fourth step. So the fourth step is testing your hypothesis by doing an experiment. So in this part, this involves procedure to come up with the experiment, and so with the materials. So this is a careful test to find out something or to prove or disprove an idea. So there are variables involved in this step. So we have to identify the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variables. So what is an independent variable? So it is the factor that is changed by the researcher. The dependent variable is a factor that we measure, and the control variables are the variables that are held constant, because in an experiment, you should make all the variables constant except one for it to become a fair test or a controlled experiment. So for Francesco Redi, he sets up an experiment in which he controlled all the variables except one. So he left one jar of meat open so that flies could enter. So that is his control group. And he covered the mouth of the other jar of meat with gauze. That is now the experimental group made by Francesco Redi. Then, let's identify the independent variable. So independent variable, the other term given for independent variable is manipulated variable. So in the experiment of Francesco Redi, it's the gauze that is the independent variable. Then, the dependent variable is the appearance of maggots. Then, let's recall that one jar of meat was open and the other jar of meat was covered with gauze. So, in the illustration, this is it. So, there are two jars. Meats are inside, same amount. Right. So, we have here the jars, the type of meat, the location, the temperature, the time. They are the controlled variables in the experiment of Francesco Redi. And there is only one manipulated variable. So the only one variable is not controlled, and that is the gauze or the cover of the jar. Now let's proceed to the fifth step. It's analyzing your data and drawing a conclusion. So in this step, we are going to summarize and explain what happened in the experiment. So, by the way, going back to the experiment part, you should make at least 3 trials for your experiment to become valid. Then, after that three trials, proceed to the next step, which is analyzing your data and drawing a conclusion. So, example, let's go back to the work of Francesco Redi. So, of course, he recorded his data. He discovered that maggots appeared on the meat in the control jar, which is the jar left open. And he discovered also that there is no maggots appeared in the jar covered with gauze. So what could be the So in Redi's experiment, the results supported his hypothesis. So let's recall that Francesco Redi hypothesized that flies laid eggs on the meat and the eggs then turned into maggots. So therefore, he concluded, based on his result, that the maggots were indeed produced by flies. So his experiment supported his hypothesis. So he also disproved the theory or the idea about spontaneous generation. So this is the illustration. Okay, drawing data, recording the data, and drawing conclusions. And we have the last step of the scientific investigation, which is communicating results. So this is a very important step of the scientific investigation because it allows others to either disprove or support your hypothesis. So after Francesco Redi did his experiment, he also shared the results or his result to his other co-workers, other co-scientists. And here are the views of the other scientists pertaining to the work of Francesco Redi. So John Needham, so there are a lot of scientists in whom Francesco Redi has been shared, but I only mentioned here 2 of them. So for John Needham, he disagreed with Francesco Redi and made another experiment out of the idea from Francesco Redi. And Louis Pasteur also tested Redi's finding, and another theory was arises, and it was called biogenesis. So out of the findings, why is it very important for us to share or communicate our results is that our findings might be a new references for the doing of background research in the next experiment that will occur. Alright, so this is the illustration of communicating your results. Alright, so we're done with the 6 steps. Let us now summarize our lesson for today. So basically our lesson revolves around the steps of the scientific method. So this is the illustration or the graphic organizer. So first we have the asking a question, then followed by the second step, doing background research. Third step is constructing a hypothesis. Then fourth step is testing the hypothesis with an experiment. Then we have if the procedure works, you can now analyze your data and draw conclusions. If not, just troubleshoot the procedure and go back to testing with the experiment. Alright, then after which you just do communicate your results. Okay, so thank you so much for listening, my dear students. For the activities that you have to answer, just refer to the classwork tab in our Google Classroom. Alright, so bye-bye.